Hello, math students. Welcome to our module about statistics and probability. This is lesson 1, and it is called Chance Experiments. The goal for our lesson today we will learn what probability is and how it is determined. The question that I want you to be thinking about during the lesson is, does the probability of something increase when you repeat it over and over several times? And if you think it does, yes or no, then I need you to tell me how you know. If you don't think it does, then tell me how you know. So that's the question we're going to be thinking about when we're talking about our lesson today. All right, some important things to know. This is brand new information. As far as your math learning career, you haven't ever really been officially exposed to probability. So we need to figure out what probability means, why we use it, why we have it, and what it looks like. So probability is a measure of how likely it is that an event will happen, okay? And what we're talking about typically, just to get your mindset in the right type of mathematics, is we use probability when we're talking about chance happenings. For example, football games are always chance because you never know who's going to win until it's over. Horse races are always chance. Card games are chance. Maybe I would even lend myself to say that any game of any sort is a game of chance because you don't know what the ending or the outcome is going to be until you get to there. So probability is a type of mathematics that mathematicians use to kind of describe or possibly predict what the outcome of an event will be. So again, probability is a measure of how likely that an event will happen. A thing that I like to relate it to directly to us, especially right now, is what is the probability of there being a snow day, okay? And the snow day possibility increases if we have more snow, obviously, and it decreases incredibly if we don't have any snow. So that's something to think about as far as trying to understand what probability is used for. Probability is indicated by a number between 0 and 1. Okay, so that if you're looking at that seems like a tiny little range, 0 and 1. There's not a lot that can happen in between the numbers 0 and 1 on a number line. Actually, there is. There's a lot of numbers that can happen in between 0 and 1 on the number line. But so far in your math career, you've only talked about the decimal values or the fractional values and possibly the percentages that lie in between 0 and 1. Probability, when you're actually trying to identify the probability of something, it sits on the scale that fits in between 0 and 1, and I'm going to show that to you in just a minute. Some events are certain to happen. That means they always do. They always happen. For me, a certain event that is always going to happen is that my alarm clock is going to go off at 5 a.m. every Monday through Friday. And the reason why that is because I'm a school teacher and that's what time I get up. So that is a certain event. My alarm clock will go off at 5 o'clock every Monday through Friday, while others are impossible. So an example of most of the time something being impossible would be it is impossible for me to eat shrimp because I hate it and I will never eat it. Okay, so voluntarily that event in my life would be never or impossible because I hate shrimp, so I won't eat it. In most cases, the probability of an event happening is somewhere between that certain area, like I will definitely do this, and the impossible area. It's never going to happen, okay? And so the probability of an event happening somewhere between them is what we were talking about when we said that the probability is indicated by a number between 0 and 1. So if you look at 0 and you look at 1 and think of it like a scale, and then you realize that probability lies in between certain things happening, so they will happen 100% of the time, and impossible things happening, that happens 0% of the time, right? I will never eat shrimp, so that will never happen, so that would be 0%. So I also like to think about them kind of as percentages to help me organize my thoughts with that. So probability of events usually happen in between it never happening, which is impossible, or definitely happen, which is certain. Okay, so that's kind of what we do is we look at events, we make a guess of what we think is going to happen, then we actually watch it happen, and then once it has happened, you then calculate what the probability of that event is. A tool that has been designed that a lot of the people who study this specific type of math are called statisticians, and a tool that they have come up to help us be successful with understanding how to determine probability is called a probability scale. So I'm actually going to draw it right here. So probability scale. I would like you to also include this in your notes because we're going to be using this in class a lot, and you're going to need to have a true understanding of what it means. So a probability scale is just that, and actually it's really simple because it looks like a number line. And if you're following along, this end value on our number line is going to be 0, and this end value on the number line is going to be a 1. And the reason why on the probability scale this end value is 0 and this end value is 1 is because, remember, we just talked about if an event is impossible to happen, Mrs. Nelson eating shrimp, then it would be at 0 because it is impossible that I will eat shrimp. Okay, it is, because I do not like it. So that, for me, the probability scale, the probability of Mrs. Nelson eating shrimp is impossible. So it would be a 0 on the scale. Okay, if there is an event that is certain to happen, that means absolutely will happen. A certain event would give us a rating of a 1 on the scale. Okay, so 0 on the scale is impossible. Certain on the scale is a 1. Okay, now, as you can attest to or remember, there is a lot of fractional pieces that happen in between 0 and 1. Okay, and none of them are going to be negative because you can't have a negative event. Like, for example, if you said that you were trying to figure out the probability of getting 3 chocolate chips in 1 cookie, then you're not going to get a negative answer because if you don't have any chocolate chips in the cookies at all, then the event can't occur. Okay, so that's why we say there's no negative values on this probability scale because there has to be a chance of it happening in order for it to be an actual event. Okay, so that's why we have only positive values. All right, however, they can be tiny, minuscule possibilities, itty bitty bitty, like smaller than we've ever dealt with, and they would still fit in between 0 and 1. So that's what you've got to keep in mind. Something that really helps me understand this is if you're gauging this and you're looking about in the center, then this is called the half mark. And when you're counting, half exists, right? Well, the important place about half is we're going to write equally likely. Now, let me explain that. Equally likely is very important because this is halfway through the event that on this ultimate end it's impossible, on this ultimate end it's certain. So smack dab in the middle is where they are exactly equal of happening. So to finish this labeling right here, this space on our probability scale is actually called equally likely to occur or not occur. And I have to make sure that you guys are able to see that. Okay, so halfway on the scale is always called equally likely to occur or not occur. And what that means is this spot in the probability of an event tells us that it is exactly the same outcome that it will happen or it won't happen. Okay, now some of you are sitting here going, I don't really understand what she's doing. Well, I don't want to give you too much, because what we're going to practice in class is we're actually going to do some events, and we're going to teach you how to determine the outcome of those events. And then once we figure out what those outcomes are, they fit in this scale every time. Okay? So for today, in this lesson, the only thing I want you to do is I want you to kind of memorize or be able to recognize when you see this probability scale, because when we show you how to determine the outcomes of the event happening, you will see very quickly how it fits onto this scale. Okay, so 0 is impossible to happen. Shrimp. Mrs. Nelson eating shrimp. Impossible. Certain. An event that is certain to happen for Mrs. Nelson every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. The alarm clock for me will go off at 5 a.m. That is certain to happen. Equally likely to occur. Equally likely to occur could be whether I drink tea in the morning. Sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't. So it's equally likely to occur, or it's equally likely to not occur, because some days I don't want any tea in the morning. Some days I do want tea in the morning. So that would be an event that would fit somewhere around here, because I could do it or I couldn't do it. Okay, so that's what the halfway mark means. Generally, if you get an outcome of an event that is less than half of the time, it usually sits in this area, and we don't even put any more numerical values here. But what we call this area right here, let me change colors so that you can recognize it. What we call this area in between impossible and equally likely is we call it unlikely. And the reason why we call this area unlikely is usually if it happens less than half of the time in the event, it's really unlikely that it's really going to occur. Okay, so all of this area, mathematically, when you determine the fractions, and let's say they happen less than half of the time, then we would say that the probability is unlikely. Okay, however, if you're doing an event and typically it falls to the right of half, so more than half of the time, you're going to get that answer, or it will happen. This area then is called, and of course I choose my marker that's running out, so let me change colors. I apologize. This area is called likely to happen. Okay, and so it's kind of an amazing scale that really makes sense, because the closer you get to 1 is the idea that it will happen. The further away from 1 that you get is the idea that it won't happen. Okay? And so this probability scale is really, really helpful, because what you do with this probability scale is you take the actual outcomes of the event happening, and you're looking for trends. Okay? So you're looking, does it happen more than once? How many times did it happen out of the total number of times? Okay? You're looking at that. Then once you figure out what that is, you can then convert it to this scale, because remember, when you're looking for the number of times something happens out of the total number of times, you're actually creating a fraction. So a fraction lives in between 0 and 1, typically. Okay? So most of the time, I would like to say, on the certain side of the scale, most of the time, we will be able to take any event and fit it on this scale. Okay? All right, so let's go back to our goal. Today we will learn what probability is and how it is determined. Okay, one more time. Probability is the measure of how likely it is that an event will happen. Okay? And then how it is determined is you actually have to do some testing. You have to do it. Okay, so if you're going to do an event of counting how many times you get heads on a penny, that would be an event. And then you do some flipping, you write down how many times you actually got heads, and then you would put it out of the total number of times, which makes it a fraction, and then that fraction will sit somewhere on the scale, and that will tell you the probability of the event. If you get 0 heads when you do all of your flips, then it's impossible. If you get less than half of your flips that were on heads, then we would name it unlikely. If you got exactly the same amount, then we would call it equally likely to occur. If it was more out of all of your flips, if you got more heads than 50% of them, then it would be likely. If you got all heads every time you flipped it, then it would be certain. Okay? All right, kiddos, I think that's really helpful in understanding probability. Does the probability of something increase when you repeat it over and over several times? I don't know if I would agree that I would say that the probability itself increases, but I do believe that if you are taking an event and you are repeating the event several times, then you are widening that fractional amount that's going to occur. Another thing to remember is that fractions are also percents, so you're changing the percentage of times of the actual event occurring or not. Okay, so that's kind of a loaded question, but I helped you answer it. All right, kiddos, that's all I have for today. This is going to be fun. We have lots of neat things planned for you to understand probability. Okay, talk to you soon. Bye.